Friday, December 22. To every household and every school, Ellen White writes in Education, page 263, to every parent, teacher and child upon whom has shone the light of the gospel, comes at this crisis the question put to Esther the Queen at that momentous crisis in Israel's history. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4, verse 14. And then from Daughters of God, pages 45 and 46. Esther was a beautiful Jewish girl, cousin of Mordecai, who took her into his home after her parents died and loved her as his own daughter. God used her to save the Jewish people in the land of Persia. Note, this second paragraph above is introductory material included about Esther in Daughters of God on page 45 and was not written by Ellen White. However, the two subsequent quotations below were written by her, and we continue. In ancient times, the Lord worked in a wonderful way through consecrated women who united in his work with men whom he had chosen to stand as his representatives. He used women to gain great and decisive victories. More than once, in times of emergency, he brought them to the front and worked through them for the salvation of many lives. Through Esther the Queen, the Lord accomplished a mighty deliverance for his people. At a time when it seemed that no power could save them, Esther and the women associated with her, by fasting and prayer and prompt action, met the issue and brought salvation to their people. A study of women's work in connection with the cause of God in the Old Testament times will teach us lessons that will enable us to meet emergencies in the work today. We may not be brought into such a critical and prominent place as were the people of God in the time of Esther, but often converted women can act an important part in more humble positions. Yes, many have been doing and are still ready to do. End of quote. And that brings us to our three discussion questions for this week. 1. The book of Esther does leave us with some unanswered questions, particularly concerning Esther's role in the court of the king. Even though she was elevated to the role of queen, how do we reconcile these things with her faith, or can we? 2. The famous words of Esther, "And if I perish, from Esther 4:16, have echoed down through the millennia as an example of faithfulness even in the face of death. How do her words reflect what God's people will face in the last days when the issues in Revelation 13 become a reality? And 3. In class, go over the question at the end of Monday's study about not revealing your faith at times. Should that ever be the case for us?
Dreaming Dreams Part 2 by Andrew McChesney. Since childhood, Joseph Delamoux had gone to church daily and, following his father's example, knelt before images. But he had a vivid dream when he asked God if he was going to the right church. He sensed that God was calling him to leave his father's church. So 16-year-old Joseph joined another church in Conakry, capital of the French-speaking country of Guinea in West Africa. He soon became its youth leader and he organized numerous outreach programs. Several years passed and Joseph's father grew increasingly displeased with his son for going to another church. "I want you to learn English," he said. "You need to give up your church activities and focus on English." Joseph was reluctant to stop going to church, but to make father happy, he quit the outreach programs and enrolled in English lessons at the age of 23. The English teacher, Fortunate Calobilori, opened the first lesson with the words, "Let's pray." Joseph was astonished. He had thought that he was giving up God to learn English, but the teacher prayed at every lesson. 3 weeks into the lessons, the teacher asked Joseph for help. "I have many papers to grade," Fortunate said. "Please, could you stay and help?" After grading the papers, Fortunate invited Joseph to study the Bible with him. Joseph was pleased. He thought, "God is following me everywhere." But the Bible study left him confused. He had left his father's church to join another church, But now he was hearing new Bible teachings that seemed to lead to Fortunate's church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. "This is because of my father," Joseph told himself bitterly. "If he hadn't sent me to these lessons, I wouldn't have these problems." He continued Bible studies for 2 months and then went to his pastor for advice. He wanted to know which church was right. The pastor dismissed the Adventists as incorrect. "Don't listen to them," he said. Joseph asked for a meeting with the pastor and Fortunate to discuss the Bible. The pastor refused to come and sent representatives. When the representatives failed to support their views from the Bible, the pastor demanded a second meeting. But again, he sent representatives whose answers didn't satisfy Joseph. Joseph decided to pray and fast for 3 days about what to do. And then he had another dream. The 13th Sabbath offering on December 30 will help spread the gospel in the West Central Africa Division, which includes Guinea. Thank you for planning a generous offering. We will read more about Joseph and Fortunate next week.
You have been listening to a reading of the Adult Sabbath School lessons by Dr. Percy Harrold and the inside story by his niece Sibylla. Apart from being provided free to those who are visually impaired, these audio lessons are available on the official General Conference Sabbath School and Personal Ministry app, on SoundCloud, Apple iTunes, and also on YouTube. Search for Percy Harrold Sabbath to find all of these. And remembering all the time that God is always faithful.